Good evening. I'm Douglas McGregor, and thank you for joining us for Our Country, Our Choices Evening Insight. I think we have an interesting show this evening. We're going to focus primarily on veterans and their interests, needs, concerns. And joining me are two more veterans. I've got Lieutenant Colonel retired Daniel Davis, U.S. Army. He has a podcast called Deep Dive. And don't be afraid, you don't have to get wet to watch it, but it's a very good podcast. And just above Dan, I have this man from the Navy. His name is Jason Loughran, distinguished former naval person. And he is currently the leader of America First in the state of New York.
Thank you for having
Now,
me.
before we go into that, I did want to just briefly touch on current events. It's just a brief synopsis that I think many of our audience will be interested in hearing about. So let's go through the first one about Ukraine. And this is a statement that we found in a very recent report, and I thought it was really important in view of the legislation that we've seen passed in the House that's preparing to send $61 billion to Ukraine. And if you look at it carefully, it says mobilization has finally made the motivation of Ukrainians to protect the country, and the lack of demobilization leads to negative consequences at the front when entire brigades leave their positions. The losses in Ukraine at this point are horrendous. We see a great deal of evidence that just within the last 10 days, 8,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed. Need to understand two things. First of all, the infrastructure that you need for combat. What I mean by that is the supply and medical support and evacuation support that soldiers need is really non-existent on the Ukrainian side. People who are badly wounded are left on the battlefield to die. They simply cannot get them out anymore. And worse than that, in some cases, people who are very badly wounded that are desperate to be evacuated have to pay sums of money to ambulance drivers to actually take them to some place where they can get care. This sort of thing is incomprehensible. The point is, the Ukrainian front is broken. The Russians are advancing, and it seems only a matter of time until complete collapse sets in. So for those of you watching, the question you need to be asking your representatives and your senators is, where is all this money going? What are we paying for? There may be no Ukrainian state and certainly no Ukrainian military by the time anything that we plan to send arrives. It's that bad. The second point is about the Middle East. And at the moment, everyone is waiting for the next shoe drop, or the drop if you want to talk in those terms. But today, Netanyahu was quoted as saying, "We will enter Rafah, and we will eliminate the Hamas battalions there with or without a deal." Well, the so-called deal for a ceasefire involved a prisoner swap. That has indeed fallen apart. There are an estimated 1.2 to 1.5 million people in Rafah. How many Hamas fighters are in that mix? Estimates are somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 to 20,000, maybe a few less. But the people that are living in Rafah are about to find that they are in the middle of a massive attack that may or may not kill most of the so-called Hamas fighters, but will certainly do enormous damage to the men, women, and children who are there, hopefully to receive aid. And this is something that has prompted the International Criminal Court to take action and issue an arrest warrant for Mr. Netanyahu on the grounds that he is responsible for a war crime. So we're all watching and hoping and praying that there can be a way out of this, but he seems to think it's inevitable. And the next point I want to leave you with is a comment about the border. And this came from Oregon Republican lawmakers who happened to be touring the U.S.-Mexico border today. They told us something that should be self-evident by now. The cartel is in charge. Gosh, what a shock. In other words, the federal border police have no real influence or control since they have been ordered to open the borders and let anyone in who wants to come in. And we have no real military power to commit to the border. Oh, I'm sure we could move them there, but they're not present. The National Guard soldiers that have been sent there have been so constrained that they cannot possibly stop anything. So this is the situation. Our borders are not the responsibility of our government. That has shifted decisively to organized criminality in Mexico. I can't think of anything worse. So that's our quick synopsis of where things stand right now on our border in Ukraine and the Middle East. And now we turn to a very important question. I know that there are many veterans watching, and there are some who have not served but are very interested to know that we have tens of thousands of people who've served over the last 25, 30 years, many of whom are suffering, not just. And the question we want to talk about this evening is the Veterans Administration. The Veterans Administration has a lot of good people in it who are trying very hard to do good things, but it seems we continue to come up short repeatedly. So, Dan, would you do something different? Would you change something? If you were going to change the Veterans Administration, what would you change? How can we improve things for veterans?
Well, I think, Doug, the first thing, like I have seen, all throughout my military career, it's leadership. It's all about leadership and the person at the top. And, and we've talked about so many different things. They want to adjust the Veterans Administration. They have some legislation to do this. They want some checks and balances or whatever, but nothing ever changes. And I think until you get some decisive leadership at the top with some authority to make some fundamental changes, I just don't think anything's going to make any difference because there's so much bureaucracy. I mean, you got to come in and, you wrote the book on how to reform the U.S. military and get rid of a lot of unnecessary bureaucracy and headquarters and compress them down. And I bet something like that could happen here too, where you could get rid of a lot of the hierarchy and get more to the action that people need. That could also cost less, but that's going to cost somebody to get rid of a lot of the bloated, administrative parts that nobody likes to get rid of because that's where so many jobs are. But until that changes, I just don't see anything on the ground changing.
Well, you know that we actually assigned a former Army Chief of Staff to direct the Veterans Administration. That was General Shinseki. And things have seemed to have gotten much worse. The complaints, the numbers of them about mistreatment, maltreatment, whatever you want to call it, have actually risen.
Well, I think leadership, it's got to be good leadership.
Yeah, well, I know, but I think that was an attempt under the Obama administration to put somebody in there that would be deeply concerned and might affect things, but it doesn't seem as though he had much impact. Jason, what's your view?
Yeah, I can't agree with Dan and yourself, Colonel, anymore. I think that there is a point of no return when government agencies get too big. And this is nothing just on the VA only. This is any government agency in the federal government. They are far too comfortable with their size, and they don't feel the political pressure of the people that they're serving. I know this because, having served time in New York and with veterans in local offices, when the politics are closer and the elected officials are closer to the problem and the people that work there are closer to the feelings of the elected officials pressuring you to make a difference, then you can at least in your own line of work start taking what you're hearing directly from constituents in public hearings and the elected officials there to represent them into the work that you're doing. So Dan is 100% correct. We need to definitely cut the fat. We need these agencies, and it's not just the VA, it's everybody in the federal government now, to start looking inward and say, we got to start operating more lean. And no one's going to do that until we have leadership in place who's going to, put that order out and strike fear into leadership to let them know that people are going to have to start being accountable.
Well, normally it takes an executive order from the President of the United States that directs something along the lines of what you're describing to happen. In other words, the executive order directs whoever is in charge of the Veterans Administration to make profound change, but at the same time gives him the authority or her the authority to act. I haven't seen any discussion of that. Second thing is we spend billions and billions of dollars on veterans health care. It's not as though we don't care. There's no shortage of money. I wonder whether or not the place is ever being audited. We've already discovered that we can't audit the Department of Defense. No one can account for hundreds of billions of dollars that disappear into the black hole we call defense every year. I have the sinking feeling it's probably not much better in the VA. What do you think?
Colonel, just to add on that, I think that one piece of government that we've really shifted too far from was our role and responsibility as an auditing and oversight authority. We have shifted too far away from that, and even politicians, they far too often will take a round of applause for passing the PACT Act and other great legislation for veterans, and then requiring agencies like the VA and others to do things for veterans. And I see this at the state level too, but ensuring that those offices do what the law says, and then effectively ensuring that those agencies are following the laws, that's a whole nother thing. And we don't talk enough about that today.
Well, the question I have is this, and I agree, there's clearly not enough oversight, but are things to the point where they're too big to oversee, that the system has grown to a point that no one ever anticipated? The Veterans Administration came into existence, as we understand it today, after the First World War and again after the Second. And those were wars that produced hundreds of thousands of casualties, hundreds of thousands of dead. It was designed for the mass casualty event of the World War. Now, that doesn't mean we haven't had casualties since World War II. We all know that we had. We lost 38,000 in Korea, dead, killed in action, roughly 58 to 59,000 killed in action in Vietnam. And we know that we've had diminishing numbers of casualties, but we've still lost 10, 15,000 dead between Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, along with hundreds of thousands of people who've been wounded, not just physically, but also mentally. Is it time to consider an alternative to the status quo? And one of the things that I hear from many, many veterans is, why can't I simply seek out health care where I live, wherever I happen to be residing right now? Can't I go in there with a card that says I'm so-and-so and ensure that I get the treatment that I need? And finally, can legislation be passed that mandates that whoever the physician is that the veteran approaches is compelled by law to treat him? Because one of the things I also hear from people in the military is that, well, I went to see this specialist, I went to see this doctor and said, I'm sorry, I don't take your insurance. Many doctors don't like the government insurance. It doesn't pay them enough. It doesn't accommodate their needs for rapid payment. In other words, there's a wait involved, and then they're not able to charge as much as they would like. Is there a way to get around this? Is there a way to make this work? Can we move beyond the two world wars and the system that we developed to support veterans to something new? Don't rush to answer by any means. I know everybody's speechless, but I think it's a subject that we have to address.
Thanks, Daniel. I think the idea is ambitious, but I believe that it needs to be done. And it'll take an ambitious leader to do something like that. But it's critical, because one thing that that is very consistent across veterans healthcare is that what we want to have is for a patient and a doctor to have a good relationship. I need to be able to talk to my doctor, and they over time build that relationship, and that individual get to know me, and I develop a sense of trust with that person. Obviously, we've all heard the stories about the first day a veteran walks into the VA that he's leaving with prescribed medication for depression or PTSD. First day. How confident do you think that veteran is in that prescription to someone that they just met and they just had a conversation with? So I really like what the Colonel is saying here, because we do need to shift the focus on relationship building. And that's only going to happen when we're giving them choice and giving the veterans the opportunity to integrate into their community and the healthcare system within that community. So whether it's a municipality at a local level, that's that doctor down the block that sees my mom and my dad and my son and knows my whole family, that's what we want to lift and empower. This concept of, the veterans going to the VA healthcare, system, and there are wonderful benefits to the VA healthcare system. I want to double down on that. There are great doctors that work there, and they have great utility to the country, because I understand that 90% of our doctorate students do a rotation in the VA. So it's tremendously beneficial to the country and the workforce development side of doctors. But the emphasis to build a relationship, Colonel, you and I know this, and Dan, you probably agree. How many different VA hospitals do you probably go to while you're in the military, given all the different transitions that you have by changing commands? And then on top of that, then transitioning out of the military back into the community, and having to go to a VA healthcare system that is serving hundreds, maybe thousands of people in a geographical area. You know, I really hesitate to say that I feel like that facility builds a really strong and trustworthy relationship with the patient. So I'll end there and turn it over to you, Dan.
Yeah, you know, Doug, I wanted to kind of draft off something you said a second ago. I think that the president or some appropriate authority for this entity needs to empower somebody that says, all right, I want you to go in and analyze what's going on. First of all, top to bottom, don't assume anything. Just say, all right, what's the objective here? Great health care at an affordable cost for the country and taking care of our people. Is the system that we have the best one to do that? Can it be fixed? Can it be radically changed and come up with something? Maybe the situation is, if you come in with a fresh set of eyes and power to make some recommendations and empowered by the president, you could say, you know what, we're going to completely change what we're doing here. Something that makes sense in the modern world, not from 1945, you know, something like that, not from 1968 even, but something that makes sense right now. Maybe we need to, you know, just hatchet out 2/3 of the bureaucracy of this organization and get rid of a lot of the bloat there, so we get closer to somebody just taking care of the people. Maybe the situation is that once we do this analysis, we find out kind of what Jason and what you were talking about a second ago, that the most efficient way is to delegate this down to the local area, to wherever the veteran lives, they can get health care there like any other American can. And that's going to be how we're going to take care of them. And we can funnel the money down there. And then you don't even need a lot of this bureaucracy that we have and all these levels of command and headquarters and whatever. You can get rid of a lot of that, all of it, and then just put the money down toward taking care of people. I think that there's lots of things that can be done, but we've got to get past the point where we just want to tinker around the edges and make it a little better here, a little better there. We need to do something pretty significantly different to get better quality care for our people.
Well, this leads into the next topic for discussion, frankly, and that's recruiting. And we all know that recruiting is an enormous problem right now. And one of the areas that I think needs to be addressed is this problem of not just health care for veterans, but also for the people on active duty. Where are they going to live and where are they going to serve? And one of the problems that we confront is the old Cold War system of individual replacement that shipped, you know, every single day, 50, 80, 90, 100,000 people from one place to another. It's enormously expensive, by the way, when you ship people to Germany, ship people to Korea, bring them back to the United States. And you have this permanent churn of say, 30 to 40 to 50% of your unit is always new. And you're always saying goodbye to somebody and always welcoming somebody. We live in a different world now. Whether people in the United States know it or not, the imperial military establishment is going to change, because the empire that's been built up over decades is ultimately going to go away. We're not going to have hundreds of thousands of troops in Europe, hundreds of thousands in the Middle East. And we can't have people going from port to port to port. We have to have some measure of stability. The reason I bring this up is because recruiting is enormously difficult. And I talked to many of my former classmates from the military academy, my brother Rats from Virginia Military Institute, people that I served with who are non-commissioned officers, and they all tell me the same thing. You know, if my son comes to me or my grandson comes to me and says, Dad, I'd like to be in the Army, or I'd like to be in the Marines or something else, I'm going to tell him, forget it. You don't want to be in it. It's a terrible place now. So that's the second problem. The second problem is that there are too many people out there who've served who are now looking at what they perceive to be, and with considerable evidence, I might add, the deterioration and decline in the discipline, the training, the structure, the organization, the equipment, and they don't see anything improving. They hear a lot of rhetoric, but the truth is they're not sure they want their sons, their daughters in this kind of military establishment. And then there's one other thing I wanted to mention before we go to the broader discussion. We've got to find new ways to entice people to serve. One of those was something that I discussed 2 or 3 years ago with a number of people inside Washington privately. And I said, if you set up a system whereby a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine who turns in 3 years of honorable service, they should be tax-free at the federal level for 1 year for every 3 years of service. Well, what this means is that if they serve for 6 years, they get 2 years that are free of federal taxation. If they serve for 9, 3 years, and so forth. And this also applies before they ultimately leave the service if they say retire at a 21-year mark. But we have to change the retirement system. This business of paying everyone forever and ever it simply cannot go on. We've got to have a limit. So if you serve 30 years, I serve for 28, the future legislation might say you get 50% of everything you earned on active duty for 28 years for every year that you serve. Plus you get these years tax-free. But we no longer provide that kind of payment all the way through for the rest of your life. The only thing that we should provide to veterans that serve their for life in uniform is obviously health care. That's non-negotiable. Somebody who serves for 20, 25, 30, 40 years, whatever it turns out to be, they shouldn't have to worry about that. But I think we need to begin looking at some of these things. So why don't you take those on, and let's start with you, Dan. Do you think any of that would make a difference? Would it help or not?
Oh yeah, I think that'd be a huge issue. I've never even heard that concept about getting tax-free earnings once you got out. I mean, that'd be a huge motivator, I think, to a lot of people, because a lot of people don't like this whole issue of taxes anyway. And if you could say, hey, for service to your country, you're going to get a benefit that nobody else is going to get, that everybody else wants. I think that'd be a big issue right now. And look, and I think some of the bigger reasons why we're having trouble right now with recruiting, I mean, I'll just jump on what you said there about what people who've been in are saying, but also when people out there of military age are seeing, a lot of these generals like David Petraeus a couple of days ago, I was shocked at this. He was actually saying he wants forever wars. He says we should never have left Afghanistan. People see that we're staying in Syria, in Iraq right now, in the Red Sea, fighting this dumb war with Yemen down in the Houthis area, et cetera. And people don't want to sign up to go and fight stupid wars that don't have anything to do with American national security. They want to defend our country and our borders. And when they're not used on our borders and they are used over here, a lot of people just don't want to sign up for that. And I think until we get that fixed, that's going to leave a problem with our recruiting.
No, I think you're 100% right. And people wear out. How many times can you go overseas? How many years can you spend at sea before you wear out? You finally say, this is it, I've had it. And we really can't afford that, because it takes us time to adequately train and prepare a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine to perform his or her duties. So I think that's very important. The other thing that I have always thought about is that if you tell someone who's ambitious, young, who may ultimately aspire to build a business, if you serve for 3 years, you get a year free of federal taxes, which enables that person, if they want to start a business, to get out and get a good start in the business world, in the private sector, for 12 months, because he or she is not paying this tremendous overhead in federal taxation. Then I think you're ultimately going to succeed in attracting some better, more capable people. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but it strikes me that that's something that I would be looking for as a young man or woman if I were interested in the private sector at all down the line. Jason, what do you think?
I mean, that is 100% right, Colonel. But I just want to make something very clear. Those tax abatements are only for the Amazons and the Googles of the world, okay? Don't start coming up with ideas to give it to every other American. You might really get somebody down at the Hill.
Okay, well, we'll have to deal with that too. Obviously, a lot of times we stand around here and say, "What can we do to resurrect Teddy Roosevelt, who crushed all the monopolies, who broke up Standard Oil, which was the largest corporation in human history, belonging to the man John D. Rockefeller, who was the richest man in human history, but he did it and he was successful." We need something similar right now. We have too many places where we say they're not just too big to fail, they're just plain too big. And they're a burden to the American people. So you got a good point. What else, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% right, Colonel. And going back to strong leadership, I wonder if art schools are having a hard time recruiting students, because when the president is wiping out student debt for art students at art institutions, I'm fairly certain that sends a message to veterans and people who even ever considered serving in the military to say, maybe instead of joining the military, I should just become an art student because I can go to school debt free. And that's really what I think. I joke, but at the same time, that is truly what we're talking about here. When you don't have the support of the president and Congress saying we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that these veterans get priority on any type of benefit that we're talking about, and let's spend some time talking to them about what benefits they really wish that they had gotten when they got out, to better understand how we can actually get those recruitment numbers back up. I love the concept
it's interesting that you bring that up, because in a state in New England, there was a vote quite recently about whether or not to fund housing for homeless veterans, or to turn the funds that would be used for that purpose over to illegal migrants coming into the state. And believe it or not, the decision was made to turn the money over to illegal migrants, to leave the homeless veterans on the street. Now, I'm not saying that we have an obligation as a state anywhere to take care of everybody all the time. I'm perfectly willing to accept the argument that people sometimes actually are responsible for their own misery, that they put themselves in bad positions. I understand that. But juxtaposing veterans with illegal migrants is very disturbing to me. I mean, that's contempt for your own population and for that portion of the population that was willing to serve in uniform. To me, it's incomprehensible, but I think that's where we are.
And on top of that, I think it sends a message to deter people, and not just veterans, everybody, from civic engagement. Because I know one of the most frequent topics that I hear about when I speak to people who are maybe not on the political beat and know a lot about government all the time is they don't understand the spending. They don't understand why veterans have the issues that they do. When I bring topics and others bring topics up to Congress, and the Congressional Budget Office says, this has got a CBO score of 120, which is $120 million. And then you turn that around and speak to the elected officials to say, hey, can you really try to push this bill? It's got a CBO score of 120, but it's really going to make a difference. I'm sure I'm not the only person that's heard it. It's, right now we're in a fiscal crisis. We can't push that, or it might set a precedent for some other constituents and other advocacy groups to say that they also want this. So, there's no end to the excuses for why they can't pass things that Americans really care about. And then Americans get home, and those same people advocating for a better America get home and turn on their TV and see billions of dollars being spent on something. And they're like, what's going on? I thought that we were in a fiscal crisis. There's a lack of true understanding of what Congress is spending money on, and then the advocacy work that all of the Americans are doing for better America, and the pushback they're getting on that stuff.
Well, and do you need any better example than what's going on with this $95 billion so-called foreign aid package you just got passed, right, with both the House and the Senate, that had nothing for the U.S. border? So I don't get why we keep throwing all these billions of dollars everywhere but here.
Yeah.
Well, I'm told that there's also hidden in that provision something in the neighborhood of $3 billion that are supposed to go to non-governmental organizations, many of whom are helping this migrant flow coming up from Panama and all through Central America and crossing into the United States from Mexico. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why would we want to subsidize NGOs that are effectively promoting that? The argument is, well, these people need our help. Well, they chose to take the route Why are we setting up aid stations for these people that aren't even our citizens when we have homeless vets that no one cares to house?
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense to me.
And then,
But
Colonel,
there are a lot of things that don't. What do you think, Dan? What else can we do that would improve the lives of veterans? I know we have, excuse me, a lot of people that have mental health issues. And I think it was you, Jason, you began this process talking about handing a veteran a bag of meds and sending him on his way. And we have veterans who continue to commit suicide on a routine basis. They no longer show up in the news. What are we going to do about the mental health crisis from the people that have served repeatedly in places like Afghanistan and Iraq?
Well, look, I think first of all is just acknowledge that it's a legit issue, and that it affects a lot of people. And I mean, it's just got to be built into the process here. I mean, we've it's always a human condition. We've always had this problem to some degree, but ever since we started with all these, counterinsurgency crap, with all these deployments nonstop all the time, I mean, those numbers have all spiked, and so we need to also recognize some of the causes of these things and say, hey, let's stop putting our guys in these positions to where they have this. And, literally these deployments all over the world are not helping. So let's actually get to the root cause of some of this and quit inflicting our troops with this so that they don't have to be dealt with this kind of stuff after they get out.
Yeah, I think if we also began to look at what I would call regional stationing, home stationing units, formations within a particular region. That region might be the Midwest, it might be the Southwest, it might be the Northeast, so that people knew when they joined that most of their time would be at a post that was probably within 100 miles or so of where they're from, or maybe a little bit more. And this would allow people to invest in houses and become integrated, as you say, into the communities. Right now, frankly speaking, members of Congress and senators aren't terribly concerned about the men and women in uniform who are serving in their states. Now, they want the posts to remain open. They want the bases to stay as a means of funneling money to their constituents and donors and friends inside their respective states and districts. But if we began stationing people in specific areas on a routine basis, so that perhaps out of, say, 9 years of service, less than 2 would be spent on deployment, and the rest of the time at these home stations, then the soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines would vote in those states and districts. And if they voted, I think the senators and congressmen would be much more interested in them and their votes. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's a great idea. I think that also gets to one of the things you talked about at the top of the show here about the cost of constantly this churn of, posting people all over the country and all over the world. So, I mean, just the logistics alone would be, cut to a small portion of what it has been. And then it'll also improve the quality and the connection of people to their environment and to the rest of the country, which right now is kind of absent. So I'm all for that.
What do you think, Jason?
Yes, sir. I have to agree. I mean, before I comment, I just want to say that if anybody out there is listening and is a veteran who is struggling and hasn't taken on that issue, you have to go, brother or sister. And there are people here in this room, the people here, Colonel and Dan and myself. Please look at my information and reach out to me if you don't know who to go to. You have to confront it. And it's not going to fix itself. You're going to have to try a few times. Not every square peg fits in a round hole. You have to find the right fit for you. And so, outside of just that call to action for anyone listening today, I do agree. Veterans need to be civically engaged. But my personal belief is the financial counseling and the economy. We need to ensure that we're giving economic empowerment opportunities to veterans. I believe that veterans are a group of people that will continue to look inward and say that I'm not doing enough. That's just how they're wired. And in this state of the economy, given the entrepreneurship struggles, given the job market and stagnant wages, and housing prices increasing, I think that there are folks out there that blame themselves for the lack of, social success they're having with savings account to buy an engagement ring or to buy a home. And that only propels things. And I think that it all starts, again, I hate to say this again, but it starts with leadership. We need a president that's going to prioritize veterans and make their quality of life better, but give them opportunities to have purpose and succeed in life, and to raise a family and to have children and to start a business. And all those things will help the mental health component that we're dealing with as a community.
Well, not a connection. Our Country, Our Choice has got an interesting program that's going to hit the roads here in June. We may get there earlier, but right now we're focused on early June. It's called the Roadrunner program. And why don't I just show you this video, and then we'll talk about what the Roadrunner program means, because it's really focused on veterans. We're going to drive all over the nation, and we're going to talk to veterans, and we're going to cheer veterans, thank veterans, and push for veterans to get the support that they need. That's a big part of what we're doing. And let's just watch the video and you tell me what you think.
Our Country, Our Choice is on a mission to help preserve the security, prosperity, and moral fabric of our nation. We're about taking action, moving forward, and getting the message spread far and wide, inch by inch, mile by mile. We're excited to introduce the Our Country, Our Choice Roadrunner Tour. The goal of our tour is to partner up with America-loving companies like yours and hit the road to honor our nation's veterans, defend our Second Amendment rights, spread hope, awareness, and galvanize communities to positive action. The timing is crucial, and if we don't act soon, we could see the fabric of our nation torn apart like never before. The good news is that patriotic Americans everywhere are activated. They are excited to participate in events that remind them of what America truly is, and are more motivated than ever to unite towards our common cause. This tour will act as a mighty wind to energize Americans, connect them with like-minded brands, honor our veterans, and promote and protect our embattled Second Amendment. We hope you'll join us in our cause, have some fun, help grow our collective community, and build prosperity and hope for all of us. The Our Country, Our Choice Roadrunner Tour. Hop in.
Here you get a chance to see what the Roadrunner actually looks like. This is part of the Roadrunner convoy. That's a big 18-wheeler. And on its back, we will have a stage that we can erect and set up with lights and sound and everything in the space of about 45 minutes to an hour. And then above that, you've got the Roadrunner RV. And this will have a team on board that will include a documentarian who will photograph, film everything. And then we are going to interview Americans. We want to talk to veterans, but we want to talk to everybody. We'll pull into truck stops and we'll get out and we'll talk to whomever is at the truck stop. And then we'll also hit various places where sponsors have stores or businesses located, because we're obviously interested in funding this effort. We want sponsors. We are big advocates for the Bill of Rights. We think that the Bill of Rights should be defended with every last breath and blood in our bodies. And we truly believe in the Second Amendment, that Americans have a right to defend themselves, their property, their families. And so all of this is bound up together, and this RV will have a satellite connection on it, so that those interviews that we conduct with veterans, citizens who have a view, who want to express themselves, that will show up virtually every day. We will take those videos, we will edit them, and then we will post them every day. They'll certainly be part of the Evening Insight whenever we broadcast it, at least on a weekly basis. We want Americans to tell us what they think. We're not censoring anything. If people want to talk to this, provided they don't use too many expletives and their English is fairly good, then they can say pretty damn well whatever they want. We think that's important. Now, we're going to have some major stops. When I say a major stop, that'll be where we think we have a concentration of members and interest. And we'll have a band on the stage, and we'll have celebrities who are very supportive of what we're trying to do. I won't reveal their names, but you'll recognize many of them because they're people that believe in the same things that we do. And all of this is ultimately about unifying our country. And the one thing that veterans do very well is unify the country. You know, there's no institution like the armed forces anywhere in any society that does more to express the values, the character, and the purpose of the nation. And sponsors who may be interested in this ought to contact us, because this is a brilliant opportunity for you to advertise what it is that you manufacture, what it is that you produce, and to identify with the values and the principles that we represent at Our Country, Our Choice, and on the Roadrunner Tour. So I'm sure I'm going to see you guys on this tour. We'll make sure you show up periodically. You'll want to be there, believe me. And we'll be at all sorts of events, NASCAR, county fairs, state fairs. We want to get out to America. This is not some sort of predigested Hollywood production. This is real America, real people. We want to hear what they have to say, and we want them to know that we exist. We want veterans to know that we exist and that we're in their corner. So make sure that you two are available. You'll be called upon to spend some time on the RV. If you're real good, we may allow you to ride in the cab of the big 18-wheeler. You never know.
I'll be there if I get your autograph, Colonel.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the least of your worries. Well, what do you think? Are we crazy, or do you think this is a good idea?
Man, I think you're crazy in a crazy, like a fox kind of way. I love it. I think it's great because, yeah, I mean, you're giving a voice to Americans, and that's one of the biggest problems that I think is facing our country right now, is that you have this moneyed elite in the country that's up at the top of everything. You know, the 1% of the 1%, the people who have all the money, who control all the media, and they are the only ones that get to talk. And I see so many Americans, you know, that don't have any voice. And look at this issue with the border right now. It is, the news out today was that the border has been the number one issue in Americans across the board for the most consecutive months in 24 years, and no politician other than just talking about it here and there wants to even mention it, but it doesn't even get anywhere because the people don't have a voice. But something like this is going to start saying, no, you do have a voice, and we're going to start promoting it out. So I think it's bloody brilliant.
I agree.
Jason?
Yeah. I you know, one thing that we can all agree in this room is that the American people are hungry for authenticity and integrity.
Yes. Yes.
And there's what better way to put a mic in front of everyday Americans who had no, you know, didn't wake up that morning thinking they were going to be on TV or get asked what kind of changes America needs to make to get back and to restore its strength. And so I really think this is a great opportunity for Americans, but even better an opportunity for sponsors. I mean, now consumers are so tired of the same old 3 companies or 4 companies you're buying from. You know, everyday Americans having a relationship with a company again that you're going to buy goods from. I think that was something I remember when I grew up, my mom and dad would say, you know, we only buy this brand, you know, and nowadays that doesn't happen anymore. So what better way to get close to real, authentic Americans at the grassroots level for a company to say, hey, we're thinking about you. We're not those big guys that are ignoring you and are just lining the pockets of politicians to get tax abatements. We're thinking about you because you're the consumer that matters. I think that's great. If sponsors are listening right now, you better come in, and Colonel's going to sell out. There won't be enough room on the bus for those sponsorship logos.
Well, I knew you'd rather have a boat, and that the boat would be red, white, and blue and have OCOC on it and cruise up and down the east and the west coast and maybe up and down the Mississippi River. And maybe we'll get to that eventually. But right now, it's road bound, and it's going to go everywhere. And it's going to run for the rest of the year. Once we start in June, it's going to run through the election and into January. Now, I don't know how much further it will go after that. I suspect we'll do it again. But right now, that's our plan. And we want to try and hit, if we can, every state on the continent. Now, that may or may not be possible. It depends on where we go. And that depends to a large extent on sponsors. Where would they like us to go? And at the same time, we want to go where veterans are. And we do know that there are large concentrations of veterans in various places. Texas is one. Pennsylvania has, I'm told, somewheres in the neighborhood of 786,000 veterans, 489,000 of whom are married with children. Now, that's an enormous number of people. And if you can mobilize those veterans to get out there and unify this country, the impact politically will be enormous. I'm convinced of it.
I think you're right.
I'd love to see that, sir. I think veterans need to get more civically engaged.
And see, part of the problem, Doug, is that it's been too isolated. They've just been out there and, like a dot on the map. But if they ever get into a community where they see that they actually have connections, across the country, I think you could mobilize a lot.
Well, I think this is the beginning of something like that. At least we hope so. And we do want sponsors, and we want them to understand that this is an opportunity to develop those relationships that you mentioned, Jason, between the people and the products that they're selling that they want to buy. And we want Americans, American products, American manufacturers, obviously. And we're driving American automobiles and using American oil and gas. And we may even haul coal around in a special car. So whatever is required, but it's going to be American. That's for damn sure. Well, listen,
I'll bet you
thank you.
That you guys go to more states than Joe Biden does on for his presidential campaign.
Yeah, I'm sure, but he won't notice. He won't notice. I don't think he notices anything anyway. So having said all of that, by the way, I'm glad you brought that up because we are nonpartisan, which means that if we stop somewhere and there are candidates for office that want to come over and join us, we'll let them do it. We're not chasing candidates, but if they want to come to us, they want a position on the stage, they want to say a few words, Democrats, Republicans, obviously we tend to favor independents, but we'll bring on anybody who wants to say their message and say their piece. We're happy to have it. And you'd be surprised. I think there are some candidates who will, and there are probably a hell of a lot that are afraid to do it. But this is a good place for them to be as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Jason. Thank you. Well, listen, that wraps it up tonight. And I think we've had a good session. We'll do more in the future. This is just another attempt to move down the road towards what we hope will be a better America. So thanks so much for both of you for joining us and sharing your views and ideas with us. We'll do it again soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Doug.
Godspeed.
Sure. And before I leave this evening, I'm going to just leave you with a few words. Here at Our Country, Our Choice, we have a saying, love of country leads. And that's a phrase that has its roots in the American Civil War. And it was very important during the war and especially important after the war to everyone. Love of country leads. We really believe that if you love your country and you're committed to it, you can do no harm. So if you love your country, you want it to be successful and you care about it, join us. Join us at ourcountryourchoice.com. We're waiting for you. We need you. And we'll make sure that you have a voice on our platform. That's what we're really all about. Thanks very much to everyone. God bless and good night.